Welcome to Israel Watch. The Israeli media reflected on several issues, including the beginning of the temporary truce in the besieged Gaza Strip and the reactions to that inside Israel, as well as the harsh results of the Hezbollah operations in South Lebanon, which echoed the general mood inside Israel. Meanwhile, the voices are rising inside the Zionist regime, saying Netanyahu and his cabinet members are responsible for everything happening. I welcome Mr. Ali Haider, expert on Israeli affairs, to discuss these topics with us. Welcome to the show, Mr. Ali.
Thank you.
Since the declaration of a humanitarian truce and its details, Israeli media started to broadcast the reaction of Israeli analysts, experts and officials who had consensus that this truce is an advantage for the Palestinian resistance and allowed the Palestinian leader Yahya Sinwar to mock the Zionists.
אנחנו חשבנו שלא יהיה עוד שיא של בקרים כבדים כל כך מאז ה-7 באוקטובר, כשחווינו את הנורא מכל, והבוקר הזה הוא בוקר כבד, כי אין ספק שמדובר בעסקה רעה ואפילו אכזרית מאוד, מצד אחד, מצד שני, אין אלטרנטיבה אחרת. יחיא סנוואר היטל בנו ומהטל בנו תקופה מאוד מאוד ארוכה, ולמעשה אנחנו גם רואים אם אנחנו רואים את דפוס הפעולה שלו לאורך כל השנים, סביר להניח שגם פה הוא ימשיך עם העסקה הזאת לעשות מחד. מאידך, איזה אפשרות אחרת יכולה להיות לנו? יש לנו, מעבר למחויבות, יש לנו גם את העורף הציבורי, שחייב לדעת שמדינת ישראל, הממשלה, הצבא...
אחרי שאנשים האלה הופקרו פעם אחת, אנחנו לא מזכירים אותם שוב.
In the same context, there was an additional admission that the leader Sinwar was mocking the leaders of the occupation and all the Zionists.
מדינה שלמה עוצרת את נשימתה, וצריך להגיד את האמת, סינואר זה לא איש של מילה. אני באופן אישי יש לי ספק גדול לגבי האיש הזה שכבר היטל בנו כמה פעמים. לכן צה"ל אסור שיעצור את האש עד השנייה האחרונה. דבר הכי משמעותי בעיניי והכי, אם את שואלת אותי מה אני חושש, זה משני דברים. אחד, זה הירידה במשמעת המבצעית או שעננות של כוח צה"ל בזמן הזה, זה מאוד מטריד אותי. הדבר השני, זה הדקה שאחרי, לא היום שאחרי, הדקה שאחרי. ישראל חייבת לחדש את הלחימה במלוא עוזה.
So, Mr. Ali Haider, we see a belief among Israeli experts today that the truce is in favor of the Palestinian resistance and that the leader, Yahya Sinwar, makes fun of the Zionists. What is the background of this belief, in your opinion, sir?
In the name of God, actually, when they express this belief, it is because they cannot hold it back. Especially that the Israeli leadership, since the first day of the war, raised the expectations a lot. It was offered to swap captives all in one deal, or in phases, but it rejected. However, now it accepted. Why? Because there are developments on the ground that proved Israel is unable to decisively end the battle, as it was hoping. And it was unable to achieve any serious or fundamental goals when it comes to the captives. Even more than that, we can say that the danger on the lives of these captives has increased more than ever, especially after the land incursions of the Israeli army, where they reached the outer environment of the areas that are supposedly the strong front lines and defense lines of Hamas, which means that the lives of the captives are in danger. This was reflected in the Israeli arena, where public outrage increased with the families and supporters of the captives are protesting to put pressure on the regime in order to save their lives.
What about Yahya Sinwar in this context?
Yahya Sinwar, as they say, is the one managing these tactical negotiations through some means, such as broadcasting a few videos of the captives held, which was censored by the Israeli media, but the Israeli public could watch it online and on social media. Also, he declared that he is ready to swap captives. This is also a point that echoed in the Israeli public sphere, in addition to the details of the negotiations, which reflected his decisiveness and a steadfast frame to which he adhered, which forced the Israelis to yield to the demands of the resistance owing to its steadfastness, despite the fact that the Israelis are the ones bombing and committing massacres.
And without war, the Israeli army loses war. This is the conclusion made by one of the researchers in the INSS Research Center.
הלחימה תתחדש אחרי ההפוגה, ששוב, אני מקווה שתהיה יותר ארוכה, כי אני מקווה שיחזרו יותר חטופים. הלחימה תתחדש, כי אם הלחימה לא תתחדש, ישראל הפסידה במלחמה.
Losing war is an obsession worrying Netanyahu's regime, which has tried to ease this issue through assuring that the fighting will resume strongly after the end of this truce.
צריך לומר אבל שבכירים בישראל, אפרופו מה שאמרו אלון וצביקה, דיברו על כך במובהק שההפוגה כנראה תארך מספר שבועות, אבל גם גנץ וגם גלנט וגם נתניהו ממש נשבעו בישיבת הממשלה שאחרי תימשך הלחימה, היה קונסנזוס בקרב כל הממשלה, לא היה אחד שחשב אחרת, ואני חייב לומר שגם הערכה שלי שהלחימה תתחדש, לא משנה כמה ההפוגה תתארך, מכיוון שהקונסנזוס בישראל, במערכת הפוליטית ובציבור, הוא פשוט מאוד מאוד רחב.
This rhetoric was not convincing for the Israeli social media users, who saw that accepting the truce itself means the Israeli occupation army has lost the battle.
It seems that our captured son is equal to 3 Palestinians who will return to kill us. Hamas is teaching us an unbelievable lesson even when we decide to enter and strangle Hamas with all the force we have, with all the capabilities and budget we have. Hamas is the one maneuvering. The 50 captives will cost our regime a lot. Our regime must declare bankruptcy. The soldiers who were killed, poor soldiers. We failed. We abandoned our soldiers in the battlefield.
Mr. Ali Haider, the skepticism on Israeli social media on this truce, if the Israeli fighting stops, the Israeli regime will lose the war, and that is why it must resume after the truce. Your take on that?
First of all, it is important to point out who said these words. It is Ofer Shalah, and he is not just a researcher at INSS. He served as a senior member of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and also the head of a secret committee that deals with classified topics and files. Therefore, he is an important personality in this field. In terms of the stance he expressed, when Israel launched this war, it did so because refraining from it after October 7th would be considered as a heavy and strategic defeat for Israel. It had no option other than launching a war, meaning that the outcome of the October 7th event, or the Al-Aqsa flood operation, which included the intelligence and operational failure, the distortion of the Israeli invincibility, destroying its power of deterrence, all these results will be translated on the ground if Israel did not launch a war. This is why it started the war, in order to retrieve and fix its image. This is an idea and mindset to which the Israelis and Americans adhere and believe it, that not launching a war to fix Israel's image and its power of deterrence means a serious blow at war, and therefore this is not just a slogan, but it is the result of a strategic perspective to the future of Israel and its national security.
Back to the truce and the many questions inside Israel on whether it includes the front with South Lebanon boiling in the face of the occupation.
תראה, אף אחד לא יודע, אבל אנחנו רואים כאן תהליך מאוד מעניין, שנסראללה בעצם מנסה לקשור את עזה אליו. וישראל דווקא רוצה לנתק את הקשר הזה, וגם אם תהיה הפוגה ברצועה, ישראל לא מתכוונת לעצור בלבנון, ויכול להיות שאפילו נראה העלאה של רף האש מבחינתה של ישראל, כדי א' לעשות את הנתק הזה, וכדי להמשיך את הפעולות שהיא מתכננת לעשות שם. אגב, זו נטילת סיכון. כי יכול להיות שהצד השני לא יפרש את זה כמו שאתה מפרש את זה, וירצה אולי להסלים. לכן יש פה ניהוג מאוד עדין, אלה ימים רגישים בצפון, לא פחות מבדרום.
כן, אבל זה מעניין שאתה מעריך שנסראללה באמת רוצה ליישר איתם קו, וגם הוא להיות בהפוגה, עכשיו זה תלוי בנו.
גם תלוי בו, שלא יהיה הונאה.
So, Mr. Ali Haider, the Israelis are looking at Hezbollah Secretary General Saeed Hassan Nasrallah and trying to see whether this truce will also include South Lebanon or not. Do you think it is in Israel's interest that the truce does not include the front of South Lebanon? Why do you think so?
Both choices are not in its interest. Israel is facing a problem. This means if Israel submits to the truce and stops its aggressions on Lebanese territory, this means that it is subject to the equation imposed by Hezbollah, which is that Lebanon's front is an extension to the front in Gaza. If things escalate in Gaza, things escalate in Lebanon. And if things calm down in Gaza, they also calm down in Lebanon. If Israel adopts this choice, it is problematic for Israel. And if it does not do so and tries to impose its equations, it'll also be in trouble because, in this case, Hezbollah will deal with any Israeli violation not as a response to the operations of the resistance, but rather the launching of an aggression on the Lebanese territories, and this will prompt Hezbollah to increase its level of response.
Raising expectations?
Yes, of course. Israel is facing an obstacle in this context, and I think it is forced to abide by truce. Otherwise, it'll face a serious problem in terms of facing Hezbollah, in addition to the U.S. stance on this issue. Because the U.S. realizes that any step in this direction, facing Hezbollah, would mean a regional war, and this is what the Americans do not want.
Now, the southern front of Lebanon is taking Israel by storm through targeting Israeli military posts at the borders, one of which is the Biranit military post, which was destroyed by the Birkin missile.
והיום ראינו בצפון שוב אש מאוד מאוד מסיבי של חיזבאללה, אמנם בגבולות המגודרים של המערכה לאורך קו העימות, אבל מטח של רקטות כבדות בורקן על מפקדת עוצבת הגליל בבירנית, גורם נזק כבד מאוד לבסיס שהיה ריק. מחיילים, אף אחד לא נמצא בו בימים האלה, אבל מבחינה מורלית תמונות לא טובות לישראל שמשמחות את חיזבאללה.
The destruction footage in Biranit military post at the borders with Lebanon stirred reactions amongst Israeli social media users. These are a few of the comments.
What a humiliation. Why is Lebanon still existing on the map after such an incident?
Daniel Hajbi.
Until when will you receive strikes?
Rachel.
Continue in receiving strikes until we see a catastrophe like that of the Gaza Strip.
Binos.
We will continue to receive missiles and our children will come back home in bags.
Sarit.
Where is the Iron Dome? Where is it?
Mikhail.
What else? Will we start losing people, one after the other, one after another? This place is no longer safe because of Hezbollah on one side and Hamas on the other side.
Mr. Ali Haider, from these reactions on social media, it is obvious that the scene of the Biranit destroyed military post, which was targeted by Hezbollah, has a negative impact on the Zionists. What is your take on that?
First of all, we should point to the fact that this footage was smuggled and not regularly broadcast. And this means there are so many more scenes that were not broadcast officially. This means that the camp was hit by numerous resistance rockets, but the Israeli media censorship aimed at blacking these out. This is on the one side. And on the other side, this is a clear index to the power of deterrence of Hezbollah. And here we can say that there is a difference between the deterrence power before October 7th and after October 7th. Before October 7th, it was whenever the Israeli enemy attacked us that we attacked back and deterred it. However, Hezbollah now initiates with deterrence action for the sake of Gaza. And according to the equations Israel had put, it was that Hezbollah hit back whenever Israel initiated the aggression. But now we see that Hezbollah initiates and Israel sticks to responding at the borders. According to Israeli slogans, the Israelis should have hit Beirut, destroyed Lebanon, or hit infrastructure. But they do not dare to do so because they are afraid of escalation, because Hezbollah will target the depth of Israel in return for any Israeli action or aggression on Lebanon. And hitting Lebanon's capital means hitting the capital of their regime. This is a new level in the deterrence power of Hezbollah, and this is what no one could have thought about.
The settlers who were evacuated from their settlements at the borders with Lebanon will not dream about coming back. This is what an Israeli general concluded from the Hezbollah concentrated targeting of the area and stirred criticism on the nature of the occupation's hitting of targets inside Lebanon.
אני לא מבין איך אנחנו סובלים פגיעה ביישובים אזרחיים. אני יכול להבין, הם יורים על מוצב צה"ל, אנחנו יורים חזרה. איך יכול להיות ששלומי, קריית שמונה, בוערות, וכפרים מדרום לבנון לא עפים הביתה? שעה אחר כך, קרוזים לאיזה כפר, ומודיע להם, תוך שעתיים אתם תוקפים אתכם, לא מחסלים את הכפר, אבל יורים לתוך הכפר. אין דבר כזה, שתהיה פגיעה באזרחים, ואנחנו לא מגיבים לאזרחים. אני בכלל לא מבין על מה יורים בלבנון כל הזמן. על איזה מטרות. אני לא מבין, לא הצליחו להסביר לי, אני רואה איזה צילומים של חיל אוויר עם פיצוצים וכל מיני צלבים, מישהו מבין מה יורים? אני לא מבין.
He seems lost and puzzled. This Israeli former general says no one in the regime understands how it was that Hezbollah was able to inflict it with so much damage at the borders alone. What does this mean?
This is a translation to what I was saying a while ago about the power of deterrence. Also, more into this point, I should say that Hezbollah has not used all its capabilities, not even half or a quarter of it. This was a chance for Hezbollah to show only the tip of the iceberg in terms of its capabilities that have advanced and expanded a lot since 2006. And this is a sample the Israelis can see today, which shows them what will they face in case they decide to escalate one day or start confrontation. I will give here an example other than the Burkan missile. For instance, yesterday, a new missile entered the equation at the borders. When the resistance launched a rocket missile at a house and it turned into piles of rubble. Usually, Cornet missiles do not destroy a house, but is used to hit tanks. So when the house was totally destroyed, this reveals that the rocket is of a new type. And this is a way to deliver a message to the Israelis that Hezbollah will destroy a house for every missile Israel launches.
The Israelis are still living the bitterness of Al-Aqsa flood defeat and are holding the officials of the occupation regime responsible for this failure in the face of the Palestinian resistance. Among these is this Zionist rabbi.
שמשום מה עוד לא התפטרו, והם עדיין יושבים על כיסאיהם, והם חושבים שהכל בסדר. הממשלה נתנה הוראה, אבל יש איזו שכבה של קצינים בכירים, שהם היו אחראים למחדל הנורא הזה, כשהתברר שהם טעו. יום שלם לוקח והם לא עושים כלום, כלום, פשוט כלום.
These words of the rabbi were widely supported by Israeli social media activists.
Shlomi.
The rabbi is right in every word he said. These officials are a bunch of hypocrites.
Hayim Levi.
The number one in charge of the October 7 defeat is the Israeli army and the regime including the heads of the Shabak and Amman.
Maccabi.
The army is 100% responsible for what happened, bad intelligence and a crazy mistake.
David.
Netanyahu must leave.
Itamar.
There's a disastrous intelligence failure in managing the war and deterrence.
Can we say, Mr. Ali Haider, that there is some sort of consensus inside the Zionist regime that the Israeli army and the intelligence and their leaders are the ones responsible for the defeat that they suffered from the Operation Al-Aqsa flood? What is the repercussions of this, in your opinion? They are described as a bunch of romantic hypocrites.
Everyone agrees that the army and the intelligence are the ones responsible. But the discussion is whether the political officials are also responsible for this defeat or not. It seems, through the statements of the rabbi and the social media activists, that there are accusations back and forth between the military and political ranks. The rabbi was accusing the army and intelligence of standing behind the failure. Meanwhile, others are calling on Netanyahu to resign, meaning that he is responsible. In general, we can say there is a state of mistrust in the Israeli leadership, whether the political or security, and this is unprecedented. Israel has not witnessed such circumstances, but very limited in short periods of the Israeli history.
Now moving on to the Americans, who were not up to the expectations of the Zionists because they wanted the Americans to expand the war against the axis of resistance. This is what former Israeli General Giora Eiland said.
אני חושב שהגישה האמריקאית היא לא רק מאוד מאוד מגבילה אותנו בעניין הזה ומייצרת איזשהו סיפור שקשה מאוד להילחם בו, גם האמריקאים לא מסייעים לנו בהקרנת הכוח שלהם במזרח התיכון. תראו, מאז תחילת המבצע ב-7 באוקטובר היו עשרות תקיפות של מיליציות שיעיות בסוריה ובעיראק נגד האמריקאים. האמריקאים לא עושים שום דבר. הם הביאו 2 נוסעות מטוסים לאזור, אבל הם לא מראים איזשהו סימן שמוכנים להשתמש בהם. יש את החטיפה של האונייה לידי החות'ים. החות'ים הם שליח איראני. אני לא רואה שהאמריקאים גם שם מתחילים לעשות משהו. צריכים להבין, ואני חושב שהאמריקאים נרתעים פה מכל סוג של מלחמה, גם שלנו וגם של עצמם. והציר שאיראן מובילה פה נמצא כרגע במצב שהוא טוב מדי, ובצורה כזאת קשה מאוד לנצח. ולכן אני הייתי מצפה גם מהאמריקאים להיות הרבה יותר אגרסיביים נגד הריבון בעצם שמוביל את המלחמה, שזה איראן.
It is obvious that there is a Zionist disappointment towards the fact that the US does not seem to want to go to war with the axis of resistance in the region headed by Iran. What do we understand from this? Were you surprised?
This is an acknowledgement to what the resistance in Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq declared earlier, which is the fact that the U.S. carriers will not deter us from standing by Gaza and hitting American targets in Iraq and Syria, as well as inside the Israeli regime. And it was clear from the Gior Eiland, former head of the Israeli National Security Council, who said that among the conditions to achieve victory was that the U.S. deter all these sides involved. But the U.S. is not doing that, even though it is what Gior Eiland and others aspire to. This is based on the idea that pressure on the northern front and through Yemen will choke the Israelis, and the pressure on the Americans in Syria and Iraq will put pressure on the U.S. to shorten the battle and put pressure on Israel to stop the war, even before Israel is able to reach the goals it hopes to reach.
Anyway, those managing the war in the Gaza Strip are the Americans. They are the decision makers and not Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
והאמריקאים אותתו לישראלים לחשוב 3 פעמים, או אם לא 4, לגבי פתיחת החזית הנוספת מול חיזבאללה. ושם היה איתות. האם אתם באמת רוצים להרחיב את החזית הזאת? ושם האמריקאים אמרו, אל תרחיבו. זה כמעט שמנהלים את המלחמה. יש אומנם ראש ממשלה לישראל פורמלית, אני אומר את זה ממש ככה, יש לישראל ראש ממשלה פורמלית, אבל the chief of staff ברמה הגבוהה ביותר הוא ביידן שמנהל את העסק כאן.
Now, with regard to the economic crisis in the Israeli regime after Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, which is worsening, the Israelis are on a tough path.
זהו מגה אירוע, אנחנו נכנסים אליו עם תנאים הרבה יותר קשים, יש לנו חוב הרבה יותר גבוה, יש לנו סקטור עצום שמגויס למילואים, יש לנו עסקים שקורסים, יש לנו חוסר ודאות אדיר, המצב הבינלאומי לא מזהיר. היום הבעיה היא שלנו, אצלנו בבית, כולם מסתכלים עלינו ורואים שלא כולם מבינים את גודל האירוע.
Mr. Ali Haider, let us start with the economic crisis that hits the Israeli regime and has hit hard the Israeli economy after the Al-Aqsa flood.
هناك عدة أسباب لهذه الأزمة الاقتصادية. أولاً نفقات الحرب.
There are a few reasons for these losses. First of all, the war expenses. Second, the losses. Third, and most importantly, is summoning the army reserves, which means that some 360,000 people who helped the economy flourish had to leave their jobs and become army reservists, which means Israel is paralyzed on the economic level. At the moment, its war expenses and losses are on the rise. Its income is declining. Therefore, if this battle continues, things will get worse with the readiness of the reserve army. Now, here comes the importance of the Lebanese front, because that is what requires such a huge army reserve, and not Gaza. In Gaza, the Israeli army, which includes some 170,000 soldiers, is enough, with 2 reserve force troops to ensure they can rest.
Mr. Ali Haider, expert on Israeli affairs, thank you for taking part in this episode. And dear viewers, thank you for watching. Until next time, take care and goodbye.